All right, we are working on a 2011 Chevy Impala LT, and today we have to do a power steering cooler line. Fun. This line sits right on top of the front engine cross member. It's just an aluminum tube, and it gives time for the power steering fluid to cool down. It comes out of the steering gear right by the driver's side firewall, right at the steering shaft basically. Comes through this whole tube and then goes back to the reservoir. I can't imagine that this needs to be done regularly, but in this case, this vehicle, you can see, has taken a pretty good impact. I don't know if that's from a curb or a large object in the road or what the case may be, but you can see the dripping all over the place, and it has been compromised right here, and so it has to be replaced. Taking the passenger side tire off and taking that little bit of inner fender well off, you can see the tube right here. And right up there, it goes, this is the return. Let me see, right here. That's the return there. So I've got a drain bucket underneath that, and let's go undo the power side. All right, using an 18mm wrench, right down there, you can see kind of the steering gearbox, and there is the line. It's right in there. I should have a light. And you can see that right there, I've taken that line loose. That's the pressure hose from the power steering pump. And now I can get this one out. I had to get that one loose to get it out of the way. So right here, going to take that loose, and then I should be able to pull that cooling line right out. Easier said than done. Unfortunately, this is a brand new power steering pump, but it's been run for about 2 hours plus or minus with no fluid in it, and it's making all kinds of bad noises. So I am going to replace it just for the sake of longevity and the fact that I believe that it's been run dry way too long. Right there, there's use an 8mm wrench, and you can take that bolt loose, and that's the high pressure line. I've removed the coolant overflow tube, and I'll just tuck that out of the way. Using a 3/8 inch ratchet, I took the tension off the tensioner and remove the belt. Now I've got to remove this pulley for the power steering pump. My assumption that this power steering pump is kind of confirmed when I can move that shaft in and out so far. So that pump is definitely junk. So using my 13mm socket on a ratchet, I pop these bolts loose, holding the pump to the car, and I'll pull that out and take off the reservoir return line up here. A 16mm here on the pressure side. We'll pop that line loose, and we can get the pump right out. Once again, this is a new pump, but check out all the damage done running dry for so long. This here is the brand new replacement, and you can see there's barely any play on that input shaft. That's the way it should be. Well, I didn't really want to do this, but I'm facing the reality that this right front is going to have to come apart. I'm going to remove the CV axle. I'm going to pop the lower ball joint apart. And hopefully that'll be enough room to get all of that line out of the car. All right, the old one is out. And you can see right there, big fat pinhole that has been worn into the tube. And there's some more wear here. And the only thing I can see is that it has pushed and rubbed against a wire harness for a long enough amount of time that it wore through. I ended up cutting the old pressure line and pulling this large assembly out of the fender well. And then I ended up pulling the rest of it out from underneath the exhaust. Now you can see I've taken this new one apart right there, and that's just a PEX fitting, if you can believe it, a little crimp ring. So I've got myself my PEX crimping tool and a new crimp ring. I'm going to assemble the new parts and then I'm just going to put it back together. Well, the new line is in place. I've got my clamp on, and once I get this crimped, it'll be ready to put back together. Boom, just like that. Now it's got a factory crimp replica, and it's actually in place, so I'm happy with that. There's a couple little tabs right here, and I'm going to find the holes they belong in and pop it back down in place. So you can see oil in the vacuum line. This is just a vacuum pump for like air compressors, or AC compressors that is. And I have quite a bit of fluid in this container, and it pulled such a big vacuum, and it's such an old container that it cracked it, but it did pull quite a bit of fluid through, and it was pretty dirty looking. So I'm glad I did that step. Now I'm going to try not to spill too much, but I need to disconnect that plug and disconnect this hose that I stuck up in there and put it all together and get the pump in place. Okay, the belt is back on. The power steering pump's all in place, obviously. I remember to hook up that reservoir overflow tube, and I popped the wiring back into place, all that good jazz. I did just fire it up, and it was amazing how much of a difference that vacuum pump did on this entire job. I've done these before, and it takes like an hour, it seems like, to bleed one of these out just by running it lock to lock to lock to lock to lock. And this time it was like maybe 2 turns back and forth, and the noise was gone. Everything was smooth, right up to level on the fluid. All is good. Now all that's left is everything down here. I've got to get the CV shaft back in place. I also have to get the lower control arm back on, get that steering arm back on, hook the brakes up, get my inner fender well put back in place, and then clean this thing up. There's oil everywhere. Well, that ought to get you home.